Virginia Hernandez answers major pieces of the puzzle. Will the Antichrist use the extraterrestrial excuse to further unite the world, saying that people have been abducted around the world when it was actually the biblically prophesied rapture? Let's look at major pieces of the puzzle now, supplied by Virginia Hernandez, who was one of the insiders in building UFO. Well, it's my privilege to introduce a very special person today, and her name is Virginia Hernandez. And Virginia, welcome. Virginia has a lot of things to share with us, as much as she openly is able to, about UFOs and what we perceive as UFOs. So Virginia, I'm just going to turn it over to you, and perhaps you'd want to start at the beginning.
Well, that's the best place to start with any story. Now, this was right after the end of World War II, and 3 flying engineers came back, and all through the war they had worked on the plans for these inventions they carried in their heads. I worked in a little restaurant across the street, and they didn't like to leave anything. They'd call and I'd bring over food and coffee, you know. And then I got to where I was holding wrenches and getting mixed in it. They had rented a Quonset hut that was 3 blocks long, 3 stories high inside, and I forget just how wide, but it was quite wide inside too. And they built a working model of one. Well, no, they had working models of both, but one was a disc with a jet propulsion motor in the center and a tricycle landing. The thing could hover like a helicopter, but if they wanted to go fast, they turned up on the side and they just zipped, and that's where you got this cigar shape. The other was the flying saucer. But this one particular day, we were working on they had that, and then they had a one-man helicopter. They're still making them today, but every foreign country in the world has orders backed up on that, and you can't get one. But they had forgotten to tell us they didn't want anybody on the field that day.
Virginia, what year was that?
What? Oh, heavens. I don't know. 44, 45, whenever the war ended. Anyway, there was someone in the upstairs meeting room that they didn't want the general public to know was there. And they had armed guards at all the doors with fixed bayonets, the whole silly Marianne, you know. But we never went in the buildings. And I was operating this helicopter. It was a one-man thing, and you wore it on your back, as a backpack. But they had a problem with the control, and it could be radio operated on the ground too. And that's what they were working on, because it could be sent out over something, and whoever was on it didn't have to use his hands to drive it. Well, I was going up and down, and all of a sudden the general in there looked out, and with some profane words he said, "Blankety, blankety, blank, who is that?" And the next thing, when I got down on the ground, there was a squad of soldiers, and the 3 officers I was working with and I were all arrested. And we were taken inside and kept separately, not even together, and singly, you know. And we were there 6 hours before we were cleared through the Pentagon. And then they brought in a huge semi-truck, military truck, backed it up to the building, and took everything out of that building and put it in that truck. There wasn't even a scrap of paper left. And it went back to Aberdeen Proving Grounds where they test their new. But it was never, and to this day, and that's, oh heavens, a good 50 years, they've never admitted or announced that they do the one-man helicopter because they use it like a plane crashed on Mount Rainier on the glacier. And they took everybody off, everything out of there with these one-man helicopters. There was 2 or 3 men working, but they never put a foot on the glacier because it would have crashed over the edge of the canyon there. And the foreign countries just are crazy for that one-man helicopter. And
Virginia, at that time, were you and these 3 officers authorized to use this, or were you just trying it out?
The things they built had nothing to do with their lease. They leased the building, but didn't say why.
Okay.
It was, but when that general saw, and then when through the process he investigated and looked at the office, the things, and then I was the only one small enough to get into this working model, and I operated it in that building. They never took that outside.
Oh.
They were very cautious about that. But he saw me operate it. I weighed a whole 105 pounds then, and I could curl around all the things, and it was a disc, and it had groups of 3 lights. There was a heat sensor, there was a camera, and there was a light in those 3. And they were in groups all the way around so from any angle they could take pictures or whatever they wanted. And it was so easy to operate. And the helicopter, the one-man helicopter, was a lot of fun too. But like I said, you can't even put your name on the list. Maybe 25 years down the road you'll get up there.
Virginia, were these discs and helicopters kept in the same building?
Well, yeah, it was just like this room. We didn't have any, it was just a big empty warehouse.
Oh, okay.
And it was 3 stories high inside. And, oh, I don't know, it must have been 40, 50 feet wide and 3 blocks long. It was huge. And they weren't using it anymore. The war was over. But they did all kinds of things. After that, they designed a new plane, and the military said it wouldn't work, that it would tear the wings off. Well, Boeing decided to build it anyway, because they had faith in the design. It had been designed there at Boeing. And the test pilots took it through all of its gravs and everything, and it was just fine. It went just straight up and it didn't pull the wings off. And so they decided to see how fast it would go. And they went over, and there's a big military base. I don't remember whether it was Spokane or over in Utah, but he said, go over there and turn around and come back, see how fast it is. When they got over there, the Army says, bring it down. And our orders are to go back to Boeing Field. Bring it down or we'll shoot you down. So they brought it down, and they brought the pilots and stuff back in another plane. But there was all kinds of things going on there.
What year was that?
Well, it was, I don't know, I think it was 44 or 45 that the war ended, but it was in that time.
Yeah, just in, okay.
It was after the war was ended.
So when all these sightings started happening in 1947, did you have any insights into that?
Oh, I knew what it was.
Okay, you got to tell me, because Virginia, I think for over 30 years I've been reading about those 1947 sightings, and I've never fully understood that.
And they were out here on the West Coast.
Okay.
And somewhere on the East Coast, because by that time they had them back there at the Aberdeen.
Okay.
And
were the UFOs from the military?
sure they are.
Okay.
They were the only people that had them.
That would be the Air Force then.
Well, whatever.
Yeah.
At first it was the Army Air Corps, and then they made the Air Force out of it. And they changed labels and letters till you don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
They do all kinds of things, weird.
Mm.
At the beginning of the war, the world at large thought the old P-28 was the only fighter plane we had. P stood for pursuit. But they had another one that was way faster, but the world at large didn't know it when they kept it in Alaska. And when they would land, they'd throw a tarp over it, so you couldn't even take a picture of it. But they must have figured out that the news had leaked out, so they decided to use it to get a officer in where people wouldn't realize he was a military man. And he took off from Elmdorf Field in Anchorage with 2 sets of orders. The one public orders and the other his real orders. And he was told not to take any hitchhikers, not to stop anywhere but Tongue Point. And well, he picked up a hitchhiking sergeant. I'll bet that sergeant never hitchhiked again. And they stopped somewhere in Canada and got some whiskey. And the sergeant drank it, but I'm quite sure the officer didn't. He got to Tongue Point and it was socked in. He knew that before he left Elmdorf. And they ordered him to Boeing Field, it was socked in. They ordered him down to McCord Field, and there was only 100 feet of visibility, and they said, go on down to Portland, and he said, screw you, and he power dived in, and he tore all the undercarriage off. And he got into a very conveniently waiting taxi cab and bombed to Seattle. Now, if you believe that was innocent, I'll sell you a bridge.
Yeah.
And then he had an apartment we lived in an apartment hotel, and he came right into the apartment hotel and got a room. And the next thing we knew, my mother had an apartment there too, and we were over to Mom's. And we just finished dinner when he walked in. Oh, pardon me, I got a room with the same number, only 1 floor up. And he acted like he was drunk. Well, my father and my husband said that man is not drunk. Mother and I knew he was bombed, And then he told us his sad story, how he had all this trouble, and there were headlines, and they couldn't give him a discharge because he had Medal of Honor. And he was an officer. There had to be an act of Congress. But we believed he had a discharge. They said he was. And when he told us, so we had been military people, all our lives, and so we talked him into letting us call his commanding officer. And we did, and we finally got him to talk to his commanding officer, and he agreed to stay there, and here come the sirens and the military police, and they took him back to Fort Lewis and all of that. And he came back in a few days. He was out of the service, and all the sob sisters wrote this sad story of how they were mistreating this wonderful hero. He'd gone into the Air Force in Canada, primarily, because he was only 16 and they wouldn't let him in ours. And he was over in Europe, and he was an ace before he was 17. Mm-hmm. Terrific flyer. Now he could fly. And then when our country went into the war. He transferred over to our Air Force, and in the first year he was in American Air Force, he was an ace in the American Air Force. And he was a brilliant man. And he came back, he was out of the service, so they were building the first overpasses. In no city on the coast had any. Seattle had the first, and he was supposedly the engineer on that. I'm quite sure he turned the engineering specs in, but somebody in an office did the work, because he didn't have time. And what he was sent there for was to break up a spy ring that was based in that hotel. And that's how I got into the mess. And when these two German men they would just send in such brief amount, they couldn't get a triangulation on them. And so he would come into our apartment and he'd sit down in a chair and go to sleep. He drove me out of my mind. Later, after the dust settled, that was the only time he got any sleep. That was the only place he was safe. And I had a younger brother who was only 4 years old, and my son was 2. And he threw a cast iron Jeep at my son, and he missed him. And it hit the wall, knocked the plaster off of the steam pipes. Well, if he'd hit Raymond with that toy, he would have killed him. But they started shooting Morse. Well, you hear Morse all the time in Seattle. The radio does, because of the ships. Even now you hear it all the time. You hear it till you don't hear it. But he jumped up out of that chair like he'd been jabbed with something sharp, and all of a sudden he had a pistol in it, automatic in his hand. And I backed the kids into the closet and stood in front of him. I was scared to death. I thought he was crazy. And he thought I was doing it. So, but then in a few minutes, he realized, and he'd almost blown it. Well, I thought, when my mother comes in, she'll fix him. But he said, "You sit down and be quiet." And she looked at that gun and she minded. And I thought, well then, Dad and my husband come home, they'll get rid of him. They came in, and he said, "You're on active duty," and they braced and saluted. And that's how I found out he was a counter-espionage officer.
Now, did he have anything to do with these UFOs? Or this?
No, that was before then.
Oh,
he was long gone.
Okay. Virginia, I would ask you, was there any talk, what was it, 1947, 1948, when that one pilot was killed in pursuit of those UFOs? Were you familiar with that story?
Well, I was familiar with the story, but his plane exploded.
Oh, it did?
Yeah, that was all.
Yeah.
No, they didn't. They weren't firing on their own people.
No. But those were American-made UFOs.
They're American-made, all right.
Okay.
But where, I'm not sure. I know where they went from the West Coast. They went back to Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. But they're not there now.
Oh, okay. In the 1950s, did you encounter anything suspicious, or?
Well, in the 50s, I was out of that area, but I never have stopped being active, and I get involved in things.
My question, I know that after the war, they brought back literally tons of Nazi documents on technology. Do you know of anything they might have used from the Nazis to make this?
No, the Nazi information was on the missiles.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The Nazis hadn't figured that out.
Oh, okay. All right. So today, in your opinion, what do you think this UFO technology is good for? Are they using it for anything, or?
Well, I'm quite sure the stealth was an off-breed of that.
Okay.
They're high power, they go faster than anything else. They go faster than the speed of light or sound.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't, the first ones didn't, but they do now.
Mm-hmm. What did it feel like the first time you went into one of those desk situations?
Well, just like a plane. I mean, you know, I've flown all my life.
Mm-hmm.
Just another plane.
And now you made a diagram for us the other night, and it had a tripod.
Yeah, it had they call it a tricycle landing gear.
Mm-hmm.
3 wheels. And that's so they could come down in a hover.
Okay.
They could only land in the hover position.
Okay. Do you know much about that technology? Like, can you explain that in detail? Or, like, when you were in it, did you have a throttle, or how?
I had a like computer thing, you know. There were switches.
Okay, toggle switches. Okay.
But I couldn't see out. I had a screen that these cameras showed me.
Okay, you couldn't see out. Okay, yeah. But it was just a one person.
Well, it was the original mock-up. They could be made bigger and greater or smaller, you know, well, not much smaller. That was about as small as it could get.
So you think this was a prototype?
It was the first one.
Oh, I see. Did you have any knowledge of when they had completed it? Or?
Well, I was there when they did it.
Oh, you were? Okay, when they were building it. Right.
Yeah, I was there all the
Oh,
time.
my.
There, it was, well, it started with them getting me to bring coffee and sandwiches and stuff for them because they worked ungodly hours. And they didn't want to lay the tool down or take the grip off of the nut or something, you know, and I'd bring it over and set it up for them.
Okay. Huh. What kind of metal, do you know?
Well, much of the metals that they use in the missiles and things.
Oh, I see.
Tungsten steel and what they make out there at Albany.
So what was running through your mind when you had to get clearance from the Pentagon for?
Well, we didn't have to get clearance. They just cleared us and said we weren't espionage agents. They could trust us because of my background. They knew who I was, and these 3 officers were right promptly back in the service. You know, there's a line on the bottom of your discharge that says, and they were only out of the service a few months.
Yeah. Why would they send them to Aberdeen? They just
That's our proving grounds.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Because I know there, especially in the 70s, from my research, there was a lot of sightings in Kansas.
Oh, they were all over the place, but everywhere there was an airfield, they could use them.
Oh, I see. Okay.
They were lighter than aircraft.
Mm-hmm. Was anyone aware of their functions? Did they ever use them for reconnaissance or?
How do I know?
Yeah.
I wasn't even allowed near them again.
Oh, okay. So it's just that one time that.
Well,
yeah.
Well, they were building it, and, you know.
That is amazing. So today, what do you find in the media is a cover-up for this stuff?
Oh, the media is a bunch of bull.
Okay. Tell me about that, because you can set me straight on this.
When I was going to college, right here, I was going to Lynn Benton in Albany. I was writing a column, because I'm a writer. I was a published author at 10 years old. And the guy that owned the newspaper that I was being published in, he went and he put a big headline in his, a man murdered his wife and the police know who he is and they never have arrested him. Well, the man killed his wife and then killed himself. But it sure sold a lot of papers.
And you, of course, you compare this to UFOs in the cover-up.
No, that's newspapers and
Yeah, yeah.
you can't
Yeah.
believe anything they say.
But now, without mentioning any names or anything, do you feel that there is a media push to cover up the UFO technology?
No.
Oh,
They would love to spread it all over the newspaper. That would be the biggest scoop of the year.
okay,
But they aren't allowed near it.
okay. How many levels of security do those places have? I would imagine quite a few.
Well, you have the top security.
Yeah. Were you ever familiar with Area 51? We almost see that weekly on TV.
Oh, that's a bunch of... That's a way of... That's one that the newspapers have swallowed hook, line, and sinker. They just... That's the way to keep them away from the real thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now, I think it was December of '89, on C-SPAN, Ronald Reagan was filmed before the United Nations. And he was joking, or in some manner, about the so-called aliens. Do you feel that the government tries to put an alien thing before us to detract from what they're doing?
Certainly.
Okay. Can you think of any incidents of that, or anyone who's mentioned that to you, or?
No, because I talk with my Christian friends and stuff about it. That's...
Yeah. But in other words, it's just obvious to you.
Well, it's a bunch of hooey.
Yeah, yeah.
But it sends them off on a wild goose chase and gets
Yeah.
them out of their hair.
But my question is, I still don't understand why the secrecy, because you would imagine...
Because no other country has it.
Oh, including Russia.
Especially Russia.
Especially Russia.
And Russia wouldn't get anything from me.
Okay.
My grandmother lived in Russia for a number of years. And she told me what the Russians were.
Now, I know that there have been a lot of sightings, and occasionally you even read about, in the past few decades, even a saucer having crashed in Russia or Siberia. Would this have been American technology?
It'd have to be.
Okay.
But they probably have an explosive device that will explode them when they hit.
It's to cover everything up.
It just blows everything all to
Yeah.
our big planes and their scopes that they use, they explode.
Right. Huh. Well, it'd be interesting to know someday more of the uses that the military has had for these things. What do you think about these sightings where they say they've seen UFOs like up to 2 miles long? I know in Alberta, where I'm from, someone saw one that's way over 1 mile in length.
Oh, shoot. We have boats way longer than that.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. So like you were saying when we first started, with the technology, they can make it any size.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look at the size of the planes. And that's just aeroplanes.
Yeah.
Jets.
Now, are you familiar with this technology that utilizes light in such a way that it can make something appear invisible?
Well, that's just, it doesn't appear invisible, it makes you so you can't see.
Well, exactly, the refraction of the light. Are you familiar with that, Virginia? Or?
No,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I know what it is.
Yeah.
It just gives it the appearance of.
Yeah. In your opinion, from all your vast experiences, and you've had many, say for example, is there any way that the military use for the UFOs could be used theoretically to monitor, say, submarines?
Oh, well, certainly submarines are the easiest thing in the world to monitor.
Okay.
You get up there in the air and you can see them.
Okay. What about clouds? Can you pierce the cloud cover?
Well, I don't know how much, they don't tell you all our little goodies.
Yeah.
and they wouldn't be about to.
Well,
But that's what this one we had out on the coast. The Coast Guard went up beside them and he said, now when you can, you get out of here. And we will be patrolling this coast from the air, and we'll be dropping ash cans on any submarine we see.
well,
So they didn't bother anymore, because they did patrol.
okay,
And they practiced dropping them.
okay. You know, I think a few months ago, Valerie and I, we had seen some black and white footage, and I believe it was from the early 60s, of this one-man UFO, but it was something they had done in Canada. And of course, when you're talking about 1944 or 45, do you feel there could have been some Canadian spies who have been watching this, or that Americans have gone up there?
Oh, good Lord, our two governments have been hand in glove ever since Washington's time.
Yeah, yeah.
One of my uncles was a missionary to the Indians in, what's the name of that place? Ooh. I can't even think of the name of the town, but it was the Indians way up there. It's no hip deep to a tall Indian all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, our two countries, it's the longest unguarded border in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you find any significance, you know, going back to 1944, 1945, do you find any significance that the one-man helicopter and the disc, these early UFOs, were in the same warehouse, that they were invented at the same time?
Yes, they were.
Okay. What do you think is the significance? Are they pretty much operationally similar?
They were practical, useful military items.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those men were military officers
Mm-hmm.
that invented it.
Okay.
They graduated from MIT,
Okay.
the military school in Kansas.
Oh, you know that for sure.
Sure.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, all right.
They were graduate engineers. They weren't just military trained engineers.
Yeah. So in other words, there's some MIT connection, definitely with Aberdeen.
No.
Oh, there isn't.
No. MIT trained them,
Yes,
educated them,
right.
and then they went into the service.
Okay. Were they MIT trained at government expense?
No.
No. So they were recruited after they came out of MIT.
They recruit almost all graduates there. They try to get them to go into service from those expensive engineering schools.
Oh, I see. Okay.
They go in as an officer. They don't go in lower grades.
Well, I don't know, Virginia, what you know and what you do know and what you don't know. I know you know a lot. You've had a very interesting life. Do you feel that perhaps some of this technology could have started at MIT?
No.
No. Okay. It did start with the Army.
No, with the Air Force.
Oh, with the Air Force. Okay. And that would have been out here on the West Coast then.
Well, it was there the very beginning, but the military took them out of here right away.
Yeah.
And where they stationed them around and playing games with them.
Mm-hmm.
They, well, like when they sent that plane down, they did all kinds of things to get bad publicity. And how in the world a taxi cab would be so conveniently waiting? He jumped out of that plane into the cab. He never reported to anybody and zipped to Seattle.
Well, so they wanted bad publicity.
Sure.
Give me another example of that.
My father was sent to Niamey during Prohibition, because they were playing little games up there. They were stopping the rum runners, taking half their load and letting them go. And the Navy knew it, but they had to prove it. You know how our laws work. So my father was set up there with a cock and bull story that didn't fool the captain or anybody else, but he finally got the job done. And they said he was given a for good of the service discharge. Well, we didn't know at that time that you couldn't give an officer a good of the service discharge. You had to get an act of Congress. But we swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. I was maybe 6 years old. And he said, heck with it, I'm going to go fishing. And he went up to Seattle, caught the fishing fleet, went north. 3 weeks later, he was back at Bremerton Naval Base, the whole fishing fleet, and they reinforced the foredeck with steel. Public safety was the excuse. Well, if you'd have fired that 1 pounder on a wooden deck, it would have gone right down through the keel.
Right.
And they just did all kinds of funny little things like that to cover what they're really doing.
Virginia, for Christians today now, Dr. David Allen Lewis, he wrote a book called UFOs, End Time Delusion. And in there he talks about the men in black, and he exposes a lot of this stuff that he's researched. And we've done some conferences together. And he told me once that there's never been a close encounter of the third kind for a single Christian anywhere in the world from his research. What are your impressions on this?
He's been fooled by experts.
Really? Are you familiar with any Christians who have been abducted? Or?
They're not abducted.
Oh, I see.
In the first place, they aren't abducted. They may let somebody off or take somebody on, you know, but no, they paint with a broad brush.
Okay.
It's all. They don't tell you a word of truth, and they're not about to. They have to.
Well, Virginia, what if someone walked in here and they just were totally adamant about that they had been abducted? What would be your response to that?
Oh, really? Tell me about it.
Okay. Now, we've heard that even politicians have taken rides in these UFOs.
Oh, sure, it gets them the best publicity in the world. It gets them elected.
Were you familiar, what was it, last summer, when in Phoenix and in the Arizona area, Margaret Thatcher and George Bush, they had those enormous UFO sightings? What was your impression on that?
Well, I'm quite sure they saw them.
Okay.
But I'm quite sure they weren't. Well, as far as the people that saw them, they were unidentified, but they certainly weren't unidentified to the military.
Yeah. Again, you feel they were definitely from the military.
Of course they
Yeah,
were.
yeah. Is there an Air Force base in Arizona or?
Oh, one of the biggest.
Which one is that?
Oh, I don't know what the name of it is.
Oh,
but
yeah,
one of the
yeah.
biggest ones is down there.
Oh, okay.
On that base, that's where they talk about this Area 51 or something.
Well, now Roswell, New Mexico, right next door to it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I know. I have relatives in Roswell.
You do? What do they think of this stuff?
Being Christians and being there,
Yeah. In other words, so.
it's so much baloney.
Oh, okay.
They know it.
Okay. All right. I believe you. So that now, people talk about these ancient UFO sightings, and even the Bible talks about the wheel and the wheel with Ezekiel. What have you been? You've had a long time to think about this.
No, over in China, you know, the little country up in there in the top of the world, they had lighter than aircraft.
Would that be Tibet?
Tibet, yeah.
Tibet, okay.
Yeah, they did. They did was the one in Italy. That they could make, he had submarines and everything else.
Okay. Oh, you're thinking of a scientist now then.
Oh, he's Miguel D'Angelo.
Okay, right, right.
And they've still got the papers.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked him why he didn't make them. He said they would have executed me for witchcraft.
Mm.
So it's nothing new.
Yeah, yeah.
The Mayans had a better calendar than Caesar.
Mm-hmm.
They knew the story of Christ. And that's the reason the Spaniards got away with so much, because they thought it was Christ coming back.
Okay. Now,
And then they tried to tell then it was the Catholic missionaries that developed the Palouse horses. It came from China.
okay.
And they've got statues and everything of hundreds and hundreds of years ago,
Okay.
these spotted horses. And my father, of course, he was a military puppet, was sent to Fort Townsend to dismantle a smelter there. The Chinese would would come over here with furs and stuff and trade for gold, and they'd smelt it down so it was easier.
Now, unlike yourself, I was in the armed forces for a few years, but your wealth of experience, I'm just kind of wondering, were you aware of the rationale of why they moved so much from the West Coast into the Midwest?
Because they were afraid of being attacked.
Oh, I see.
Bombing here.
Right. And after that point, things just sort of stayed in the Midwest?
Not particularly.
Oh, okay.
They just don't tell you where they are.
Yeah.
And I have a son that was a lifer in the Air Force. I have a son that was a lifer in the Navy. My father was an officer.
Yeah.
I married an officer.
Okay. Virginia, if I grabbed you a piece of paper and a pencil, would you be able to draw us a replica of the type of little disc that you were in?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that'd be great. Okay.
I'm not much of an artist, but...
Oh, that's okay. I'll find you.
Your little boy can do a better job than me.
Well, to actually have it from someone who actually wrote in it is a real treasure. Okay, I'll pause this a moment and we'll find something here in just a moment. 80-year-old Virginia Hernandez will be putting onto the paper you see before you the actual UFO, the disc that she had flown in when she was involved with that warehouse situation in the 1944-1945 time slot. And to her best recollection, she's going to draw this before you, and then we'll hold it up to the camera for you to see.
They're out where they were going to land in Normandy.
Virginia, to the best of your recollection, can you give us both an inside and an outside view?
Well, like I said, I'm not much at art.
Oh, that's okay. When you were saying that it was dark inside,
no, it wasn't dark inside.
I
couldn't see out.
Oh, I see. Right, right.
No, there was all kinds of light.
Mm-hmm.
But I could steer because the screen, I knew, even if a match had been there, I would have seen it.
Mm-hmm. And when you were inside of this, were you in the warehouse or outside the warehouse?
In the warehouse.
In the warehouse.
They never took it out.
Oh, okay.
at any time.
Yeah. Does that warehouse still exist today, or was it a temporary structure?
No, it was a Quonset hut.
A Quonset hut, yeah.
One was metal. I don't know whether it's still there at the end of Boeing Field or not.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's about. But inside it was just, you had a, you know, just like in your car, you had dials and dials and switches. And then when it wanted to go fast, it was in this position. The optical illusion would make it cigar shaped, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you got the idea there was two different shapes, but there weren't. It's just one.
Now, how did you know how to use it? Did someone teach you, or did you just...
Well, sure, they had to show me.
Okay, so it was one of the three officers who showed you, or...
All of them, you know, we were all...
Looking at it together, or...
We were working, yeah.
Okay.
And we, later, we were involved in developing the picture tube that GE has on TV. Over in Bremerton. Now there was, well, I better not say the names, but this young man had, and it's still there, the largest shortwave outfit in the world. The military takes it over whenever there's.
Oh.
And it's in downtown Bremerton, and it's about 3 blocks long.
My. Fascinating.
And they've got the entire Puget Sound. They've got explosives everywhere. You can blow up any spot or all of it.
If they had to cover it up.
If there was something in there they wanted, say a submarine or something.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's see what you drew here. Now, is this the outside or?
The outside.
Okay.
See, this is where it's speeding. But it turns like that. Your eyes, you get the optical illusion of a cigar shape.
Mm-hmm. So that's what that cigar shape is all about then.
Mm-hmm. They think there's two different kinds, but they're not. It's just the one when it's going faster.
Boy, that's technology though, huh? But they could do that back in the 40s.
Well, when you think about that, Michelangelo could do it before Columbus.
Hmm? My. Was there anything about the inside that you might remember that was particularly colorful, or would they have red lights or green lights? Or?
Well, these lights were different colors.
Oh, I see.
And they were all around and it was utilitarian strictly.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure of that.
They didn't, they had sponge, you know, around so you wouldn't, well, it was so I wouldn't get hurt, because it was made for men to get into.
Oh, okay. These three officers that were with you, is it possible any of them were from MIT?
They all graduated from
Oh,
MIT.
they all were. Okay.
They were graduate engineers.
Mm-hmm.
And they went directly from MIT into the service because war was on.
Mm-hmm.
They graduated just before the war.
Well, they must have put out some type of manuals for operating this. Oh, they didn't?
No,
Oh.
at that time.
Oh, that's interesting. So it was just one more security measure.
Oh, yes, they were very careful. Anything they even figured numbers out and they put in a box.
Well, Virginia, thank you very much for sharing this with us. If you had a final comment to share with anyone who got to hear about this concerning UFOs and people who are Christians and who have been wondering, what would you share with them? What would you tell them?
Well, just pick up your Bible and read it. You know, you read Acts and you go on, and the last book, there's the one that tells you.
47. Kenneth Arnold, a 32-year-old Boise, Idaho businessman, was flying his single-engine plane over the Cascade Mountains of Washington. Arnold tells his story.
I had reached the altitude of about 9,200 feet when a very brilliant flash lit the sky around me and actually lit up the airplane that I was flying. And I could see way off to the right, coming in the vicinity of Mount Baker, a whole chain-like string of aircraft coming at a tremendous speed. I could see plainly that they didn't have any tails. I had never seen aircraft of that kind, and I made a quick judgment that they must be approximately 100 foot in their wingspan. And the first unit or first craft flew at a higher altitude than the last. And of course, this is completely reversed from our normal flight patterns. I had a good fix with Mount Adams, and I thought I'd try to clock their speed between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams.
Arnold estimated the speed of the craft at an astounding 1,700 miles per hour, nearly 3 times faster than any jet he had ever heard of. He was asked by a reporter to describe the mysterious objects.
You know, they would skip and sail and give off these flashes, and you take a saucer and you skip it across the water, and it's erratic, and this is how the name Flying Saucer was born.
This was the day, June 24th, 1947, that marked the beginning of what is known as the modern flying saucer era. What followed would be thousands upon thousands of unidentified flying objects over North America as well as other parts of the world.
It seemed to hover for a matter of maybe 1 or 2 seconds, and then was out of sight within 2 or 3 seconds, which was a lot faster than it had been traveling originally.
We were using our red lights and our aircraft landing lights, which is a spotlight, and pointing them or directing them at the UFO, and it was reacting to it audibly on occasion, and it did make a movement towards the lights. As we turned the light off, then it would return to its original position and remain stationary again, but it was reactive to the lights.
I judged it to be at least 150 feet across it. It was saucer shaped with a high dome. It was very shiny underneath. It was a porcelain type finish, and I was getting a tremendous shock all over my whole body. My hair was standing up, and I had electrical static feeling over my hair on my arms and my head. I thought it was doomsday.
1948, Clyde W. Tombaugh, the astronomer who discovered the planet Pluto, was sitting in the back of his home at Las Cruces, New Mexico. He and several witnesses, including other members of his family, watched a strange glowing craft move overhead. All of the witnesses agreed that the object was definitely a solid ship and that it was probably some form of extraterrestrial device.